Absolutely. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm so excited by what is clearly a pumped audience. I do apologize in advance. When I usually present these days, I try to give you closed captions. However, I am on an older laptop that's not allowing me that. So I will do my best to speak slowly and clearly as best as I can, so that everyone can understand what I'm saying. I am super excited to be able to talk to you all today about the idea of being able to use AMAZE as a tool for introducing social justice to your students in the sex ed classroom. As Lincoln mentioned, I work at Answer out of Rutgers University, which is a national organization that provides and promotes unfettered access to comprehensive sexuality education for young people and the adults who teach them. So our flagship initiative, we'll be 40 years old next year, and the flagship initiative related to that is a Sex Etc. So if you're familiar with the Sex Etc. magazine, Answer is responsible for that. What you're looking at is a picture of the editorial team from last year of all the phenomenal teen writers, the teen writing staff, should I say. And it's a great place to be and a great resource for young people. Again, my name is Tracy Gilbert. I have the pleasure of being in front of you for the next 40 minutes or so. I use she and her predominantly pronouns, although I'm open with anything that's being used respectfully. At Answer, I served as the training and technical assistance manager. And as you can see, I've worked at a variety of different places. I'm not sure if Judith Peters is here this afternoon, but if you are, hey, I saw you on Tuesday. So welcome back. So really quickly, let me run through the objectives for this particular session. By the time you're done with me, my hope is that you'll be able to define social justice, be able to explain one way that AMAZE videos can be used to introduce social justice related topics in the sex ed classroom, and then develop and list some assignments that can be partnered with the AMAZE videos in the classroom, right? The understanding is that, yes, this can be introduced. Videos, the AMAZE videos are not the champion of just showing them and all of a sudden people get these epiphanies around social justice, but that if you have the right video and you use it in the right way, you can in fact spark a really powerful conversation and introduction to your students to topics that may be of importance to them and just to our society at large. So again, we're going to discuss what is social justice. What are we even talking about when we say that? So we're going to review some baseline definitions. We're going to take a look at least 3 videos. You're going to see there's actually a whole list of videos that you can use in this regard, but we're going to look at 3 in particular that I think can be really powerful to begin that conversation. I'm going to give you a little bit more broken down advice around how you might think about social justice according to the grades that you teach. And then I'm going to give you homework because we don't have time for you to do an activity. I've got some homework for you to do in terms of applying this material to your classrooms and the students that you work with. So let's start with thinking about what is social justice. Really quickly, folks who want to tell me in the chat what you think, what you think of when you think of social justice. Really quickly, I'm going to see if I can open that up and take a look there. Sorry, didn't mean to do that.
Tracy, do you want me to shout some out for you?
Yeah, please, because I thought I would be able to see it, but I can't.
Oh, I feel you. You're always thinking in the chat is just like boom, boom, boom. Morgan says equity. You think of equity. Michelle thinks of fighting for rights for all folks. Another equity. Madeline says equality. Paris says equity among identities. John says equal access and treatment for everyone. Natalie says fairness. Noni says rights for all. Jordan says giving a voice to marginalized populations. Kat says justice on a society-wide level.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So Lincoln, I'll just put a bug in your ear. I may need you a few more times now that I know.
I'm here for you, Tracy.
So. But thank you to all of those who offered those initial ideas, because essentially, yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. So there's a few different ones here I want to share with you. The first one being from, the dictionary that basically talks about social justice in terms of the distribution of wealth opportunities and privileges within a society. So we know that social justice originally, it was used to talk about economics. We're not going to talk about economics here, but we recognize that within that discussion, it was about the distribution of privileges and making sure that, like was said in the chat, folks are having experiences of equity and equality. The San Diego Foundation actually has a definition from which I believe the National Sex Ed Standards was inspired to use, because a lot of the language is very similar. And they discuss it as the view that everyone deserves equal economic, political, and social rights and opportunities. And the last one is pretty interesting because I believe it actually comes from more of a socially conservative foundation, a framework. But one of the things I appreciate about it is that even they are talking in a way that really represents inclusivity and what everyone needs. And so the Heritage Foundation talks about social justice as the capacity to organize with others to accomplish ends that benefit the whole community. And I think I also love that one as well because of the use of the term organize, recognizing that it's not just enough to say we believe that everyone should be treated fairly and be treated equitably, but we're actually doing the work to make sure that that's happening on a regular basis. So I want us to start there in terms of thinking about what social justice is. But then I also want to offer you all these 5 principles that come from Kent State University. I don't know if y'all know it, but they actually have a degree program in social justice, which if I didn't already have my doctorate, I might consider going back. But once you get one, the idea of going back to school is an absolute no, at least for me anyway. But the 5 principles that they have come up with in terms of what social justice is includes access to resources, equity, diversity, participation, and human rights. So again, as some of you all have mentioned, this idea of equity, about fairness, about everyone being able to receive what they need for where they are is absolutely a part of the principles and foundations of social justice. So these are just a few of the areas that we think about when we think about social justice. Some of the topics, I want to stop short of calling them issues because as you can see, a lot of these really relate to just people's normative lived experience. It's not about, oh, your religion is an issue or your race is an issue. No, that's your lived experience. And it just so happens to be that there are systems and structures in place that create challenges and barriers and opportunities related to social justice. And so these are just a few. I'm sure if we had time, we can go into a full list, but I just wanted to have us start here and think about these. So here's the question I'm sure a lot of you all are thinking about, or maybe you are so clear because you are in touch with folks like myself and Melissa Carnegie and all of the phenoms on social media who talk about this topic all the time. You may be asking yourself though, what does social justice have to do with sex ed? I want to tell you, there's a lot. So let's get right on into it. I want to start with sharing some information from SECUS, Sex Ed for Social Change, who wrote about this on their website earlier this year, helping us think about the idea that sex ed is social justice. So a lot of times, you know, I'm sure some of us, when we decided we wanted to become sex educators, or we were kind of handed this topic in our laps and, you know, we kind of had the sweats about it, we didn't think of ourselves as social justice educators. However, when you think about not just the topics that we teach, but the political context in which both globally and nationally and locally that you may be dealing with, you'll find that a lot of the topics that you are teaching are in fact social justice topics. So some of the ones that are listed here include reproductive justice, LGBTQ equality, sexual violence prevention, gender equity, and dismantling white supremacy. All of these are absolutely related to sex ed and the idea that sex ed can be a vehicle for helping us navigate these issues as they surface in real time. The last one we added here is not on the blog, but it's also something that's important to think about with regard to communities for whom their social identities can be challenges related to sexual health, which I'll get into in a minute. Sex ed can also be a tool for helping advance social justice within the area of health literacy. recognizing that some folks can be challenged by their ability to understand what their health needs are and what their health access opportunities are because of the systems and structures that they are impacted by. And so being able to be that intermediary between, you know, a local health center that maybe is being discriminatory in who they're allowing access to access certain sexual health resources, or just having being an intermediary in terms of providing access to information, that in and of itself is also a form of social justice. In the United States, we have the National Sex Education Standards, the second edition for which was introduced earlier this year. And this is just some text from page 11 of those standards that was very clear that social justice and sex ed come together. And so the specific quote begins as follows: sex education should avoid cis-normative, heteronormative approaches, aim to strengthen young people's capacity to challenge harmful stereotypes, and be inclusive of a wide range of viewpoints and populations without stigmatizing any group. I know there's a lot of big words in there. We'll get to what they mean in just a second. But to conclude the statement, it should acknowledge the role that structural and contextual factors, personal, interpersonal, social, economic, and cultural, play in shaping adolescents' sexual motivations and behavior, with the fundamental goal of removing economic, racial, ethnic, gender, sexual orientation, and ability-related disparities in adolescent sexual health. That's a big mouthful, but I promise you it's very, very powerful in helping us think about the fact that it's not just enough, or it's not just giving information that's what we're doing when we get in front of a group. In many ways, we are empowering young people to be able to access sexual health in ways that they may not be able to do otherwise because of the systems that they're being impacted by. Speaking of impacts and speaking of disparities, we know from our public health folks who've told us that social inequality is a sexual health issue. And these are just some of the areas where these emerge. And I told you we were going to talk about what those big words mean. So you see them here, we're about to get into them. But in all of these areas, we find that folks who are impacted by things like ageism, discrimination against folks who are of older ages, or adultism, discrimination against teenagers and young people by virtue of their age, does connect to sexual health disparities. Racism and xenophobia, poverty, sexism related to gender or trans versus cisgender status, ableism, heterosexism and homophobia. What we find and know to be true from the literature is that folks who experience oppression as a result of these systems do have challenges with regard to access to sexual health information, accurate and useful sexual health information, as well as resources to attend to what their unique sexual health needs may be. And so it's very important for us to understand that when we come into a space, it's important for us to provide the information that we have, but to also make sure that our information is relevant to the specific needs of the young people that we are in front of. Because when it's not, these social inequities, the sexual health inequities, they persist. And so with that, I want to also wrap up this portion to help us think about the significance and salience of intersectionality, right? So intersectionality, roughly speaking, is a way of looking at the world that considers the unique combination of multiple, aka intersecting oppressions that folks experience based on their position at different margins. So while we saw in the previous slide that someone could experience adultism, a young person could experience adultism, we also know that if that young person comes from, say, a background, an urban poor background, if they come from a racially marginalized background, if they come from a gender marginalized background, that those various systems can interact with each other to create very unique, increased vulnerability where they are. and it occurs with their vulnerability as well as with their privilege, with oppression as well as with privilege. So we know folks that come from high resource communities where they already have social privilege, where they already have bias that is preferential towards them. They in fact do not experience the disparities and the discrepancies as much related to sexual health access, and even in some cases sex ed. So it's very important for us to think about our students and the various intersections that may be impacting their ability to even take in the information that we're sharing with them in an effective way. So we broke that all down. And now the question to ask is, how can AMAZE be used to introduce social justice, right? These are videos that just, happen to cover sexual health information for 10 through 14-year-olds. What do they have to do with social justice? Let's find out. Like I said, I'm going to be showing you all 3 different videos. And what I'd like you to do at the end of each video, so this is where I'm going to have Lincoln come in and run interference for me. I want you, after each video, to think about what are some of the social justice topics that may come up from what you're hearing. So the first video is, in fact, a video on intersectionality. This video is not currently on the YouTube website. However, it is on the amaze.org website. And so we're going to watch it. And I want you all to think about, as you're watching, what are some of the sexual health related social justice issues that could be discussed in your classroom as a result of this video.
And this is my Aunt Sylvia on the dance floor with her friend Gary and his husband. And this is me with some of her work friends having cake. And here's a cool group shot.
Wow, a lot of different types of people came together for your aunt's wedding.
Definitely. That sort of reminds me of what you were telling me about intersectionality, Mom.
What's intersectionality?
Intersectionality is a term developed by a professor named Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw to help people better understand their lives in society. Think of it this way. An intersection is a place where multiple things come together. And intersectionality refers to the fact that we all have multiple identities that intersect, that make us who we are, and affect the way we experience the world around us.
Multiple identities?
Well, take me, for example. You know me as your friend's mom. I'm also African American and a woman. I might experience racism since I'm African American, and I might also experience sexism since I'm a woman. Those are 2 of my identities that intersect to make me experience both racism and sexism in a different way than if I was only African American or if I was only a woman. And each of these identities also influences my likelihood to be either privileged or oppressed. In other words, whether I have a special advantage or disadvantage when it comes to things like how much money I make, the job I have, my level of education, or even getting good health care. Intersectionality helps us talk about the way that privilege or oppression could be reinforced or complicated when they overlap in a particular person.
Here's an example that might help. My uncle Sylvester is pretty rich and also an African American man who happens to have diabetes. Even though he is privileged because he has a lot of money and can afford the best doctors, he's faced discrimination and racism because he's also Black and has diabetes.
Or think about my friend Sandra. She's a white woman, a single mother, and she just got laid off from her job at an insurance company. Since white people don't experience racism, she is privileged. But because she's a woman and a single mother, she's finding it hard to get a new job that pays enough to take care of her kids on just one salary. Men often get paid more to do the same job as a woman for no reason other than their gender. That is discrimination based on gender.
Intersectionality helps us understand how overlapping identities cause people to experience more privilege or oppression in society. And if you can recognize where you have privilege, you can use it to speak out against types of discrimination that affect others in ways that are unjust.
How do I do that?
Because you're a heterosexual white male with privilege, it's important that you stand up for someone who is being bullied and make space for others in places or situations where you have privilege.
Thanks, Mrs. G, and thanks for explaining intersectionality to me. I'm definitely going to think more about it and try to stand up for others who are being discriminated against.
Good, Kevin. I'm glad we could help.
Now, could we look at some more pictures of your aunt's wedding? That party looked amazing.
Okay. So if you'll take roughly 10 to 15 seconds to kind of process what's coming up for you in terms of potential social justice topics and sexual health related topics that can come up from this video, and drop them in the chat for me.
Yes, Tracy. And even while it was playing, there was a lot of chat around this being a good video for adults around intersectionality.
This is kind of tangentially. I often think of AMAZE very similarly to Sesame Street, how it was made for kids, but it absolutely has items in it that adults can, very simple language that can be powerful as well.
And Carol says, this is a great video and I can use it with my students in preparing to be certified school health educators, which makes my heart happy.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let me see. Other people were saying the message to the young white man in the video sounds similar to what I've told my own white son: use your privilege for good and don't take up too much space.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Nancy says it gives a lot of clarity. Kristen says that they're going to add it to their lesson on oppression.
Okay, nice.
Mick Taylor says they love the explanation of privilege.
All right. So for the sake of time, we're going to go on, but feel free to keep offering your ideas. Here's just a list of potential social justice topics you can use on this video alone in your sex ed classroom, right? So beginning with the idea of intersectionality, absolutely, because the likelihood is high that many of your young people have not heard of the term before, even though they're experiencing it in real time and they have relationships with people who are experiencing it. But beyond there, in terms of talking about sex ed, you can use it to introduce conversations around racial bias and sexual health, right? So this may not be a conversation that you can have with your young folks that may not be sexually active, but particularly for those who are, or who may be thinking about things like getting access to birth control or getting access to sexual health resources, you can have conversations around what it's like to be moving about systems that may not value their health in the same ways because of their race, or may be having particular thoughts about their sexual activity. And I can guarantee you that at least at the middle school level, you do, if you're dealing with young folks of color, you do have folks who've already had experiences of people who are treating them certain ways and assuming things about them sexually because of their race. There is conversation that could be had with that, which gets us into sexual stereotyping, right? Having conversations, particularly around interracial dating and some of the challenges that may come up with that, and some of the ways that bias informs the definitions around who's attractive and who isn't, who's dateable and who isn't, what someone might do and not do sexually because of their race and things like that. If you're dealing with a particularly astute group of young people, you can talk about unique experiences related to sexual orientation in racialized communities. So talking about, for example, violence against trans women of color, particularly in African-American communities. If you are dealing with an urban population where, folks may already be interfacing with the LGBTQ community and may have already heard stories of people who've been brutalized, you can use videos like this to raise those topics and raise students' consciousness around the issues and how they can mobilize themselves with that. And then the last one, again, thinking about specific conversations that may be happening in racialized communities that you may not be aware of, having folks think about what are some of the unique relationship challenges that come up in racialized communities that may not exist in mainstream ones. So particularly around colorism, right? And again, going back to the idea of who's considered attractive, who isn't, what someone's assumed to do or not do because of their skin color, what type of gender assumptions that are made about them, right? There's stereotypes. I'm not sure if folks are familiar with the stereotype around the rapper Drake, but folks often talk about him having light skin feelings, right? And this idea of him somehow not being as masculine because he's sensitive and it being related to his skin color, right? So there's lots of different nuances that you can play with by introducing this video. All right, let's move right on to the next one. Ooh, Here we go. The next one is how to be an LGBTQIA ally.
I'm so glad that you shared your feelings with me. You know, it's important not to keep those kind of things inside. Oh, sure. Don't worry. Your secret is safe with me. It's only me and Fishy here, and he's great at keeping secrets. You may be asking yourself, how can I support my LGBTQ friends and loved ones? This is called being an ally. An ally is someone who is not LGBTQ, but supports and stands up for people who are. For example, someone who is heterosexual can be an ally to those who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. There are many ways that you can be an ally to your LGBTQ friends and loved ones. The most important thing you can do is let your LGBTQ loved ones know that you are there to listen to if they need to talk. Knowing that they have someone to talk to can be super helpful. Another important way you can be an ally is to stand up for someone if they are being picked on or bullied because of their sexual orientation or gender identity. If they are standing up for themselves, it may help to have an ally stand with them. If you hear others say mean things, you can say, "It really makes me feel uncomfortable when you say negative things about LGBTQ people." You can also get involved with LGBTQ organizations or causes. You may decide to join a GSA or Genders and Sexualities Alliance at your school. Or you can work together with your friend to start one. Sometimes people who are LGBTQ feel like they are the only person around with their gender or sexual identity, but that's not true. Helping a friend or loved one find others that understand what they are going through is another great way to show that you care. Until next time, don't forget to visit me at amaze.org or go to my YouTube channel to watch more. Bye!
All right, good people. Let's take 30 seconds or so to think about what social justice topics could you discuss in the sex ed classroom with this video, or could you introduce with this video?
Pete Stewart says, great video for classroom GSA club use during Solidarity Week this week.
Awesome, awesome.
And Don says, could be used for family therapy.
Oh, wow. So, so we're bringing in multiple, right? Yeah.
Maria says it loved that it was short and to the point. And Morgan said, I've been having a hard time with one of my classes. I will definitely show this video to help with homophobia. Oh, they're coming in, Tracy. Stina says, trans rights, particularly in regards to bathroom rights at schools. Stephanie had some good feedback, says, I liked this one too, but wasn't a fan of how the ally jumped in the middle, in the middle of mini scenes.
Oh, sure, absolutely. And I think with all of these videos, I think you're gonna find that there's some limitation, predominantly because we're talking about pretty complex topics and trying to make them simple for young people, right? And so we know from 10 to 14, they're not really able to think abstractly. They're kind of like, well, what is the truth and what is not the truth? What is right and what is wrong? And so understanding, well, I can be friends with queer people, but I can't center myself. Like even the idea of centering themselves is a very advanced concept. So we really want to try to, just recognize where students are and provide that introduction with the idea that, yes, as you evolve as an ally, you'll learn that there are ways to be that don't involve centering yourself in all that.
I love Melinda's comment saying this would be great. This would be a great grounding for understanding allyship as an action and not as an identity, and lead into a discussion on the idea of being an accomplice.
Absolutely, absolutely. I wanted to speak to quickly someone, the first person you mentioned who said something about a Solidarity Week, right? This can be a really great video that can be coupled with something that you're already doing. And also it can be something that sparks off a whole new movement particularly if you're in an environment where maybe you don't,
oh, sure.
Hold on.
Jane was trying to interrupt you, Tracy.
Jane was my ally and in my space. But if you're interested in sparking enthusiasm about doing something new, then in fact, something like this could be really helpful. So yeah, just a few social justice topics. right? Allyship, the idea of what does it even mean to be an ally, right? When we're talking about sexual health or talking about sexuality, we know that we often think about allyship with regard to sexual orientation and gender identity, but we can expand that to think about all of the different social justice areas we talked about, right? All of the different identities that we talked about. We know that that they're not as popular with older adults, but with young folks and young populations, being able to have conversations around safe spaces and safe zones where LGBTQ identified young people can feel comfortable being able to be themselves without being worrying about being bullied or being harassed. For our older students, again, the same way we talked about racial bias and sexual health, talk about sexual orientation, gender identity, and expression bias. You know, what does it mean to talk about, oh, you know, this place is a youth-friendly space if we know that it's residing in a community that's incredibly homophobic, or the person at the front desk is incredibly transphobic? What does that then do for a young person who is questioning their gender and they're trying to access, or they have a queer gender presentation and they're trying to access sexual health? Holding space to have those conversations is useful. Thinking about, this one is a little bit deeper level, but again, if you have young people who are having these sorts of conversations, you can introduce conversations around homophobia versus heterosexism, transphobia versus cissexism, right? Talking about what does it mean when you are what's the difference between when you are actively exerting hate or fear against someone who is LGBTQ, and how is that different from when you are exerting bias, right? Or you are centering yourself and your lived reality as the assumed norm for everyone else. Far too often, we know there are folks who feel that they're allies and believe themselves to be allies, but they're practicing heterosexism, and they don't often think about how things affect people who are not having their lived experience. The last two, particularly because we know of the additional barriers that bisexual folks face, you can definitely introduce this as to talk about bisexuality and gender bias and bisexual erasure, right? Talk about how often when we're talking about LGBTQ justice, we often focus on the L and the G, and we don't often think about the B, or if we do so in a way where we allow certain genders to be bi and it's okay, and then other genders, there's more problems, there's more challenges, there's more concerns related to that. So again, just a list of a variety of different topics. Last video. Here we go. Disability and sexuality. Hopefully some of y'all are like, what? I didn't know AMAZE got down like this. Yes, right? I'm introducing you to some new things. So let's just watch this and then we'll do the same thing.
Great. So I'll see you at 7.
Hey Alex, was that about Young Inventors Club? Tonight I'm unveiling my latest creation, the pizza taco. It's gonna be incredible.
Oh, sorry, I was gonna tell you. I can't make it tonight. I'm actually going mini golfing with Jillian Peters.
Jillian Peters, student body president, first chair clarinet and stage band, 5th level warlock on our ongoing medieval role-playing campaign. She is so cool. I didn't even know you were into that.
Medieval role-playing games?
No, like, you know, dating. I mean, I hope it's okay to ask, but can your parts do stuff?
Actually, my parts work just fine. Just because I'm in a wheelchair, it doesn't mean I don't have crushes or feel attracted to people. In fact, no matter what our bodies can or can't do physically, people with disabilities have the same sexual and romantic feelings as anyone else.
And, like anyone else, people with disabilities have various sexual orientations and gender identities too. From heterosexual to gay, cisgender to trans, across a full spectrum of sexuality.
But are relationships more difficult for people with disabilities?
Well, regardless of my physical ability, I want the same things from a healthy relationship as everyone. Respect, communication, consent, and fun. And like everyone, I sometimes have questions about relationships, like how do I know if someone's interested in me? How do I ask someone out? Or how do I turn someone down if I'm not interested?
Putting yourself out there and trying to date can make anyone feel nervous or scared. But the more you educate and understand yourself and your own value, the better you'll get at feeling confident and making healthy decisions.
There are certain issues that people with disabilities could be more likely to face. Sometimes it can feel like parents are overprotective when it comes to dating. Or friends might not think of us in a romantic way because they don't understand that we have the same kinds of feelings. And there are some specific challenges that a person with disabilities might have to deal with. For example, if you had trouble communicating verbally, you'd have to find ways other than speech to express yourself or give consent, like using body language, adaptive devices, or pictures.
Think of it this way. Everyone's body is different and needs help from time to time. And regardless of a person's physical ability, they can have the same feelings, hopes, and dreams as anyone.
Thanks, guys. I think I get it now. Sorry I didn't understand before, Alex.
It's okay.
And you know what? I've got something that's gonna make your date with Jillian even more awesome. 1 New York-style soft-shell pepperoni and 1 hard-shell deep-dish bean blaster.
Thanks, but were those in your pockets?
Just since this morning.
Ew.
I love our young white hetero cis male character, high school character. He's pretty fascinating to me.
Jim, right?
Jim, is that his name?
Yes, Jim.
His name. Jim is so fun. All right, y'all. Y'all know the drill. What's coming up for you in terms of social justice topic possibilities?
Well, Katie said, "Come on, Jim," which I would just like to retweet. John says that it is a great video dealing with a challenging topic. Are there any that address challenges of sexual function?
So not yet. I don't want to speak to what may come in the future because we may figure out how to do that. Again, with all of these topics, we have to be mindful of the audience and think about, well, how deep can we really go, right? A lot of these are meant to be more just kind of introductory, but stay tuned because in fact, we could figure it out and then have enough.
Tracy said, wait on it. Yes. James said, this video can invite conversations around microaggressions.
Absolutely.
And Pete said, love this. Have used it with my differently abled students.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful.
Michelle asked a question I think has come up a couple times this conference. What about kids with special needs or developmental disabilities?
Yes. So, I mean, the same way that we would, that you would need to adjust your traditional learning experience, you would need to adjust in this case. Of course, it would depend on what specific needs they have. We know when it comes to special needs children, we have some that are functioning in general classrooms and they're able to do just fine. And then we have some that are in segregated classrooms who may have parents who are a little bit more, they're more restrictive in terms of allowing their young people access to sex ed. And then again, based on the particular disability that a young person has, what their instruction might be is going to be different. So it's really kind of difficult to say kind of what a general standard would be. But I will say, just based on what I do know, is that there are ways to teach sex ed when you have students who have particular learning challenges or disability challenges. A lot of it has to do with using more visual images versus verbal communication and just keeping things a lot simpler. So maybe not using big academic words to talk about things, but just offering very more concrete information. So in fact, these sorts of videos can be useful to talk about some topics because they are geared towards a younger crowd, which has more simplistic ways of processing information. That question actually reminds me of an experience I had at a conference what is time in 2020? I think earlier, I was gonna say last year, but I think it was in the spring, where we were presenting on AMAZE and there was a young person in there who was nonverbal in a wheelchair, but their caregiver reported that they loved the videos, that they were really interested in them and they were really excited and they wanted to learn more. So AMAZE videos can be useful in that regard, but again, I think it depends on the young person or the young people that you're in front of.
Exactly, and I believe I'm pronouncing this right. Leisha says, the parent handbook that I developed with Rose for Denver Public Schools is adapted and applicable to students with IDD, and that is interesting because that's the handbook everyone wants their hands on. And I believe the last thing I've heard from Rose is that They're taking off some public school logos, and we may be able to share that with you in the post-conference follow-up. So thank you for, yes.
I like it. All right, so again, some of the topics. Again, ability bias and sexual health, particularly if you're dealing with, well, but I think you can do this. I was going to say, particularly if you're dealing with high functioning students with disabilities, but I think these are conversations that should be part of the general classroom, right? Because you could be dealing with students who are dating people with disabilities, and being able to have this information to more successfully navigate those relationships and to be able to show up in more authentic ways, I think is really useful. So being able to talk about what might be some of the biases that a person with a disability may have with regard to accessing sexual health is important conversation to have. Talking about relationship bias, just based on what Jim was saying about the assumptions of what you can and can't do, you can raise those conversations to talk about that. Dating strategies, right? So we know that Alex was talking about, like, I just want to know the same things y'all want to know. How do I ask somebody out? How do I navigate, making a decision about having sex with someone? How do I negotiate, a kiss with somebody? Or how do I negotiate contraceptive use if maybe I'm having a difference in terms of what my body can do relative to a condom or something like that. And then the last one, I'm going to evoke the spirit of Justine Fonte. I'm not sure if she's here, but reimagining pleasure, right? And I think this one is a little bit uncomfortable for us. In some cases, if we're dealing with school systems that still don't want to acknowledge that people have sex because they like it, but having people think about how to decenter the orgasm in their pleasurable experience, and being able, and maybe even decentering penetration, to talk about what might be pleasurable for folks, how they might be able to experience pleasure without engaging in the ways that we would usually or typically assign to that. So, Lincoln, how am I doing on time? I feel like I'm way, way, way over.
Well, that might be true, Tracy. But it's all good. It's all good. I've been loving the conversation in the chat.
We started at the time we were supposed to. I'm almost done though, so I just want to make sure that I'm just mindful. I will try to get through the rest of my slides pretty quickly. Here's just a list of some other videos that you can think about. Some of the ones that you've seen already, some of these you might have already used, some of these you may be seeing for the first time, but AMAZE really does try to provide a wide range of topics that in fact can be used to advance social justice issues. And so I think it's important for us to really consider how can we be pushing the envelope in ways that perhaps we haven't been doing before, just based on the material that we've been given here. So the last section is, again, and it's helping you answer the question of how do I make this practical? I know, Dr. Gilbert, one of the habits I know about me is that I have this ability to think really critical about things and go deep level to the point where people are like, what is she talking about? But I promise you, it can be very, very practical. So I'm just going to provide you really quickly 3 examples according to grade level of how you can take an AMAZE video to discuss a social justice issue or topic and provide an assignment. It will provide some questions that can engage in a discussion and provide some assignments that can actually be done with that. So at the 4th and 5th grade level, one of the big things we know that elementary school kids are dealing with is gender and understanding gender roles, right? And so a big topic that you can talk about is gender role diversity. And I put in the National Sex Education Standard Indicator, just so you're aware. I don't have time to go into exactly what those are, but if you want to screenshot this and look it up, I can tell you that this does correspond to the National Sex Ed Standards. So the AMAZE video, Expressing Myself My Way, which is, I believe, our 3rd most popular video, it is a great way to introduce the discussion of gender role diversity. And a great question you can ask your young people is, what are some reasons that people may feel like they can't express themselves, right? You may have that some people may say, oh, because people are mean to me, or people may say, well, because people may not know who they are yet. And then you may have some people who talk about because they identify as a different gender, or they behave in a way that other people don't like, right? And then a great way you can expound on that and really move in a activist kind of way, small a activist kind of way, is do a social campaign where you have everyone talking about having pride in themselves and what that looks like for them, and allowing young people to understand that all the ways that people choose to be are good. They are good and they are valued. At the middle school level, this is where by this time they've learned about gender. They should have also, if you're following the National Sex Ed Standards, they've also learned about trans, right? They've learned about intersex. They've learned about biological diversity related to sex as well, and sex assignment as well. So the particular videos, we just put out adjusted videos for anatomy to talk about assigned birth at sex versus male or female, which were the traditional names. But those are there, and they can be used to spark a conversation about sex assignment and have people think about, well, what happens when a child is born and their sex assignment isn't male or female, right? And this is useful because you may find yourself, particularly given the prevalence of intersex and the fact that far often intersex folks are made to hide their experience. You may in fact have intersex folks in your classroom that may be struggling with your general anatomy classes because they don't see themselves. Right. And so here's an opportunity to introduce this and help people understand, like, oh, just the way gender is diverse, so is sex. And that can actually get into the social justice issues of, well, how are intersex people treated, and is that fair, and is that just? And so a project related to that is being able to learn about and elevate the Intersex Surgery campaign. I'm going to leave that. Hopefully you've screenshot that so you can go look that up. But that is a campaign that's been advanced by intersex people who talk about the ways that they are mistreated because of their sex assignment from the time that they're in elementary and middle school. So this, in fact, can be an experience that a young person's facing that they don't get to usually see themselves represented in the classroom. Last but not least, high school, right? And so abortion rights, and with the current political climate, with the standing political climate in some of the places where you live, I'm sure this is probably something that may be on folks' mind and maybe on your young people's mind. And so at this point, we know that they've learned about how babies are made. Hopefully they're learning that, and they also know the options that a person may have if they become pregnant. And they've also maybe had some time to kind of study the laws in their area and know what people do and don't have access to. And so you got the chance to see yesterday the AMAZE video, What is an Abortion? Some of the questions you can introduce are, what was the social historical precedent for legalizing abortion, right? And by extension, what risks could occur if abortion is made illegal again, right? And this is one of those that, again, I get can be very, very testy and touchy, but we know that it is something that young people are dealing with in real time. And if they're not dealing with it, it's something they could, in fact, be affected by, given our current political climate and given the ways that things are changing all the time. And so some of the project ideas related to this could be learning about Roe versus Wade, not only learning about Roe versus Wade, but learning about the precedents from not only a political standpoint, but from a public health standpoint and from a social standpoint. And just determining from there, they could work on building a social media campaign on helping people understand why these laws have been in place and why they're so important to keep in place, despite what we know may be happening at the federal level. So this is your homework. You're just gonna do exactly what I did. You're gonna think about what is a social justice area or topic that you think your young people may either be interested in or be affected by or are being affected by. Remember, you can talk about anything. You can talk about immigration rights. You could talk about, again, LGBTQ identity. You can talk about reproductive health access. You can talk about a lot of different things. Figure out if there's a video, AMAZE video, come on to amaze.org or go to the YouTube page and see if there's a video there that can help you introduce that topic. Once you do that, you want to think about what are either some introduction questions that you can use to introduce the topic, or some discussion questions that you can use to help process the material after you've watched it. And then related to that, create either one activity, project, or homework assignment that you believe could help take that conversation to the next level. Last but not least, think about where you live, recognizing it doesn't have to be some big grand level thing. It can be something that's affecting your immediate community. It could be something that's just affecting your students in your school. But also think intersectionality, right? And think about the folks who may not be in your room, but are in your community and are also affected by the conversation. Because you can also introduce a topic, and just because the people aren't in the classroom, you can still introduce the topic in a way that can open up young people's minds. So with that, I'm done, Lincoln.
Oh, it was wonderful, Tracy. You honestly, what schedule? All the time that you need, because the chat is going. I'm so excited that we're going to be able to answer some questions now. So let me, boom, there I am. Let's start with
sharing. Oh, stop sharing.
Yeah, you can stop sharing.
Okay. All right.
Perfect. So Laura asks, what book would you suggest for a teen to have on their shelf to help address sexuality questions?
Great question. I am not going to introduce a single book that you cannot find at sexpositivefamilies.com on that reading list. I think to say that I love Melissa Carnegie is like such a gross understatement, but even if I didn't know her personally and have a tremendous relationship with her, just the work that she has put into making that resource, I just feel like, what else do we need to say? Like, go to Sex Positive Families, look at that reading list, and you will see from kindergarten, I think even preschool, like 3 years old, up through college, there's a phenomenal list of over 500 different books. And I also want to note that because folks are putting these great books in the chat, and all of these books are on the website. So just go to the website. I'm telling you, go to the website, you get what you need. Melissa Carnegie is clutch. That's all I have to say.
Yes. Another question is from Jordan Armstrong. Jordan says, I work in a predominantly white school. What is a good way to explain that white people don't experience racism? I know there will be pushback from some of the kids/parents.
Yes. So I think it starts with age, right? Like who you're doing, because I think this is going to be more of a challenge for younger kids if you're dealing with middle school or elementary kids, because they don't quite understand. They're not at the level to be able to understand systems of inequity more so than they are to understand interpersonal situations. And so you may have the challenge of not being yet able to talk about racism from a structural systems perspective. And you may just have to focus on the interpersonal perspective to say, well, let's talk about interpersonally, who is more likely to be experiencing various biases and various discriminations and so on and so forth. And for that, you've got lots of examples throughout society. You can look at the news right now and see what's happening. You can bring up the experiences of Latinx folks in under ICE custody right now. You can bring up the experiences of the Black Lives Matter movement. You can bring all of those up in real time and help young people think about, oh, wow, would that have happened? Is it possible that me and my white body would have been detained by ICE in this particular way, or detained by the police in this particular way? You can use that versus really getting into the idea that white people don't experience racism.
Thank you. I really left this question because it's all about audience. Someone asked, with social justice topics, how important is it to have a deeper relationship with the youth, a group you see often, as opposed to a guest speaker opportunity? To what extent should justice all... I can't see the rest of the question because it has disappeared from my screen, but I think that you get the point.
Yes. Before I address that, I want to address a comment that Karen brought up in the chat that I thought was really good too. About you can also with white folk or with young folks explore the question of what does it mean to be white. I think that is useful. I'll tell a little story that was like to this day, I love it so much. I was in a fourth grade classroom in like 2000, so like 20 years ago. And I asked, because we were talking about heritage and history and kind of legacy, right? And I asked the room, how do you think I got to this country? And a young fourth grade white boy said, because your ancestors were stolen by white people and brought here to work, right? So,
and
and I couldn't really say anything else because it was like, well, yeah. But I thought that was really awesome because it really goes to show that you can at least introduce those core concepts, and that if given the right questions, you can push young people to really open their minds and think about different things. So asking them, well, what do you think it means to be white? Even if they don't have an answer, that offers them a seed for them to ruminate on and to continue to grow their cognitive capacity with. So Katie offered the rest of the question with social justice topics, how important it is to have a deeper relationship with the youth. To what extent should social justice be a clear part of talking about intimacy and bodies? I think to the fullest extent possible, right? I think social justice, I get that that's also my bias, right? Because I live in a world and I have a lived experience where I cannot afford not to talk about social justice. But I think that as we become clearer as a society of the reality of social injustice, that the opportunity is there to push it to the fullest extent and help people understand diversity as more of the norm than the exception. And so I think it's a both and to answer the first question, right? So having a deep relationship with your young people helps in terms of being able to cultivate that space to ask questions and to provoke and to, really prod them to think more critically. And cultivating that in the first place sets you up to be able to invite people to also extend the conversation in ways that you can't. Because if you have not already done that cultivation work, inviting a person to kind of come in and represent diversity, that's an ambush, right? So you have to, it's a both and really, really there, I would say. And there's something going on in the chat. I'm just like, wow, I want to read from y'all. Come on, good, bad, and ugly. Yes, Christopher, I like this link here.
Yes, another question that we have from Anne is, can Dr. Tracy address the balance between sticking up for versus white savior in intersectionality video?
Yes, yeah. Well, actually, I thought y'all were going to talk about that in the LGBTQIA ally one, because I was like, it's a whole lot going on in that video as well. I think the first thing to understand is that these videos are not perfect, right? Like they do offer ideas that can be a little, I wouldn't necessarily, but I think as someone who is aware that there is such a thing as white saviorism, I think you can use that to massage in the nuances around how you do that standing up work, right? And maybe even offer some discussion questions around, what might be a different way that you could stand up for a friend of color that doesn't involve you taking over in ways they didn't ask you to, right? And offering suggestions, like maybe the time to speak isn't when, this person is not asking you to. Maybe, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, if we think about what we teach around bystander intervention, right? We teach that the job is not to confront the bully. The job is not to get in their face and, oh, I'm gonna save you because you shouldn't be bullying my friend. The job is to support the friend. And so we can also use that same thinking to help folks think about, well, we know the video kind of says standing up. What could standing up look like besides confronting the bully? What are some ways that you can support your friends of color that don't involve you being a superhero that they may not need, right? So a lot of it, again, is about massaging the nuances into the conversation that may not be apparent just by looking at the video. So hopefully that's helpful.
It is. So the last question that we have really hit me right in the feels, because I've experienced with this. So Tyler Bears says, as a white male educator in an area that is not very diverse and the number of students of color is usually relatively small, I'm wondering what advice that you have to cover the topic of social justice and oppression without feeling that I'm singling out those individual students.
Yeah.
The topic is near and dear to my heart. I just want to make sure all students feel heard and safe in my classroom. I will just say, someone who grew up in Texas with mostly all white classrooms, without a doubt, whenever it came to slavery, it would return to me. I'm like, look away from me. Like, who are you looking at?
Absolutely. I'm going to offer an example from what I do in the area of gender, and I'm going to preface it by saying that I don't know that I have the right answer. I know what I do, and I'm offering it with the hopes that it can be useful to think about. So when I'm in classes and I am talking about cissexism and transphobia, I'm quick to focus more on the experience of cis and the experience of cis privilege and problematizing that versus, oh, let's center the poor Black trans person who's experiencing violence, right? Because one, that's making them out to be an infant, and that's problematizing their experience in a way that's like, that we don't know that that's their lived experience. We know that there are lots of trans folks who are thriving, who are much more than the violence that they experience, and they don't need you pathologizing them for that, right? And so I think it's very similar to, I mean, that's my strategy. That's what I would offer to you. And as a Black person or as a person of color, whatever you want to say, I know I would be affirmed by that, to be in a space where, yes, we're talking about these topics, but it's not in a way to feel pity or to exert pity. It's to offer a foundation for folks to think critically about, okay, how do we do better moving forward, right? If we're at this point, if we're talking about slavery, we need to be doing it to think about, well, how do we not repeat that? Or wherein do we see those patterns repeated in the present day that we may need to be uprooting and talking critically about? What do we need to be doing in terms of the privilege that we see in society and some of the behaviors that we're seeing in society to make sure that they're not perpetuated, right? So unless you're a history teacher, well, and even if you're a history teacher, I just feel like history should be, what's the word, regenerative, or that's probably not the word, don't quote me, but it's like, we don't just say history for like, here's what happened in the past, but we introduce it as a way to think imaginatively about what can be in the future and what we can do differently in the future. So if that's helpful, hopefully, you know, whoever asked that question can be thinking about, how can I bring these topics up in a way to acknowledge what has happened as a means to think about how to do better moving forward.
As a means for thinking about how to do better moving forward.
Yes.
All the snaps, all the quote tweets. So Tracy, could you, there's a lot of going on in the chat. Could you share, if people are like, how do I find Tracy? Like, can you share what you're comfortable with?
Yeah, it's so funny because I'm like, I wear a couple of different hats. I'm going to give you the answer stuff because a lot of folks on here may also know me from my independent work, but that's a separate space. But I'm at Answer, so you can find Answer on social media. We have, actually, I think, you know what, let me share that last page of my presentation.
Of course, and we'll also post some links in the chat as well.
Yeah, definitely. This is all of my contact information. So if folks want to talk to me about answer related items, if they have things that they need related to, you know, doing this work at the K-12 level, definitely hit me up.
Awesome.
And as you can see, Sex Ed Honestly, Sex Etc. Again, if you don't know anything about Sex Etc., look that up. That is that's the high school version. So that's where they really can go in and critical, and all these things that I raised, they really have resources to help you do that.